My name is Greg Saltz. I live in Manchester, directly across the street from Planned Parenthood. As you can see behind me, there is a bill in the New Hampshire legislature, Senate Bill 319, that is going to put a 25-foot buffer zone in front of the building Planned Parenthood resides in. And I'm going to show you with this tape measure what this particular piece of legislation is going to do to my family and to the neighbors on the residential side of the street. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a panorama of the neighborhood so you can get a 360 view of the building and the residences that surround the building. As you can see in my background, this is Planned Parenthood. So I will pan down the street and across the street. This is Pennacook Street. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it is commercial. On the right-hand side, it's residential. That's Elm Street downtown. So this office, this brick building, is a bank, and where Senator Shaheen's office is on the corner. And on next door to Planned Parenthood is Rite Aid. So we'll come full circle around. And you will see that it's commercial on this side of the street, except for on Elm Street, which is the downtown street, which runs north to south, and it's all residential on this side. Okay, I'm holding the piece of legislation in front of me, and it says here in section 132(38) that no person shall knowingly enter or remain on a public way or sidewalk adjacent to a reproductive health care facility within a radius of 25 feet of any portion of an entrance, exit, or driveway. So I'm going to take the tape measure. We're going to measure 25 feet from their property line. All right, here's 25 feet. Standing right here, you can let go. And I want you to come stand right here. So I'm going to have my daughter stand here. I'm going to cross the street and I'm going to show you how far 25 feet is from their property. So here's Planned Parenthood. I'm going to pan back from across the street, and we're going to leave their property, and this is going to be the closest you can get on that side of the road, 25 feet. So if you have 10 people here with signs, what's going to happen, if you're standing 10 people wide holding signs, it's going to look like you're in front of Rite Aid. So if you want to be effective, you're going to want to be in front of the facility. Okay, right here is the other entrance. Instead of the main entrance, this is where the employees park of Planned Parenthood. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you 25 feet towards the east and how far picketers would be away if they decided to stand on this side of the building, 25 feet away. Okay, now I'm going to show you 25 feet from the end of the Planned Parenthood property heading towards east towards Chestnut Street. Okay, here's 25 feet. But look, I'm standing in a driveway. Let go. Let go. So if the picketers want to go 25 feet away, they're going to be standing in a driveway. So now they're going to be standing on this narrow stretch of sidewalk in front of another business location. So there is the Planned Parenthood facility. And if they were going to comply with this legislation, starting from here, and they would come all the way out, it would end up in the middle of this driveway. So then they would have to come all the way over here in front of this little stretch of sidewalk in front of this business, which would be completely ineffective for them trying to make their point against a business down the street. Okay, right now I am directly across the street from Planned Parenthood on the residential side of the street, and I'm going to show you 25 feet from the front of the building how close it would be to our side of the street. So here's 25 feet. Look out. So if you're 25 feet from the facility, you're going to be standing in the street. So you're going to have to stand across the street on the sidewalk of the residential side of the street. This is my house right here. As you can see, my sidewalk is not nearly as wide as that of Planned Parenthood. I'll show you. That's 4 feet. Okay, let's go look at this sidewalk. You want to hold this one, Hannah? All the way over there. Okay. Okay, I got it. 9 feet. Now I want to read you something. Okay, it says here in section 1, paragraph C, public sidewalks adjacent to reproductive healthcare facilities in New Hampshire communities are often narrow. This sidewalk is more than double the size of the sidewalk on our side of the street. Now let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Imagine if this was your house. I bought this house 10 years ago. What do you think this piece of legislation is going to do to the property value of my home? Now, we spoke about the degree of separation when the picketers are across the street picketing a business. But if they're in front of my house, picketing in front of my house, and I decide I want to sell my house, when do I show my house? When there's nobody picketing? Do I tell my realtor, oh, you can't come on Wednesday, you can't come on Thursday, you can't show the house on a Saturday because there might be picketers directly in front of my house? What if this was your property and somebody didn't like a piece of legislation that you voted for and they came to your house and they picketed in front of your house? That's crossing the line. That's something that is like an unwritten rule you just do not do. You know, this is America, and in America, I don't think it's kosher that you go to somebody's house and you picket in front of their house. It's just, it's like I said, an unwritten rule, something I've never seen done, and I would never do to somebody. I wouldn't go stand in front of the sponsors of this piece of legislation and hold up graphic signs of aborted fetuses and stand in front of their house and hold them and say, oh, you voted for some, you know, piece of legislation that supported abortion and now you're picketing in front of my house, and now I'm going to picket in front of your house. It's something that's not done, but it's something that if this legislation passes will be done to my property. An amendment that was attached to this bill when it got to the House committee changed the language. Instead of saying it has to be 25 feet, now it says it can be up to 25 feet. And it was presented in this kind of magnanimous gesture, you know, like say, like they were saying, using Keene as an example. They don't necessarily need to keep people 25 feet away from Keene. But let's say, the reality was this amendment was put in to comply with the law. Otherwise, the bill would have been ultimately struck down because of this amendment. Without this amendment, my opinion. So let's say instead of saying 25 feet and it's up to 25 feet, they make it 5 feet. That does nothing for us because you go 5 feet out, you're still going to be in the middle of the street. And if you don't want to be picketing in front of Rite Aid, you're going to not want to stand in the middle of the street 5 feet out, you're still going to cross the street. This is the back of the residential neighbor's property, and hi Hannah, this is an alley going down the back. So not everybody has a backyard, and because I was not notified as an abutter to Planned Parenthood when this bill was in the Senate, I had no idea, so I could not testify to the senators how this would impact me. Before I built this fence, people would always walk by and say, "Hey, how you doing? What are you reading?" And I'd say, "Well, yeah, a book." So I put up this fence so I can have a little bit of privacy. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, that degree of separation where picketers would be across the street picketing there. But if this legislation passes, well, guess what? If they want their presence known in front of Planned Parenthood, they are going to have to stand in front of my property. Now, obviously, you can see I've done some landscape and I spent a great deal of time outside. And this is going to affect our privacy rights by forcing people to cross the street and picket in front of our house. And we've already mentioned, you know, the property value issue, which is a serious concern. And then also the fact that down the street they pointed a weapon at the protesters, threatening them with a shotgun, but these are bulletproof windows. So if picketers are standing here for 6 hours and cars are driving by and the random crazy will pull up in his car and scream and yell and curse, what if one of them pulls out a weapon and shoots? Well, guess what? We don't have bulletproof windows. They don't have bulletproof windows. They don't have bulletproof windows. So another way to reiterate how this buffer zone will affect the residents who live in this neighborhood, if you take 25 feet away from the sidewalk across the street, obviously it's going to put you in the middle of the street, so you would stand across the street to make your presence known. And this is my next door neighbor, and I'm going to show you how far the sidewalk is from his bedroom window. We are 13 feet from his bedroom window to the sidewalk. As it is now, the picketers are across the street, which you go, the distance of the street is 30 feet. From the street to the back of the sidewalk is another 8 feet. Then you have another 13 feet to his window. So instead of the picketers being 50, 51 feet across the street, or, you know, up and down, they're going to be 13 feet from his bedroom window. Imagine what this guy is going to feel having people, you know, whether he agrees with their position or not, picketing up in front of his bedroom window, which he told me he can hear them when they are across the street. How much more is it going to be when they're standing right in front of his bedroom window? Here we go. No person shall knowingly enter or remain on a public sidewalk adjacent to a reproductive health center within a radius of 25 feet, blah, blah, blah. Except if you are a law enforcement officer or emergency personnel, or if you're just, you know, on the sidewalk solely for the purpose of reaching a destination. So what happens if I have company and they park on this side of the street, which happens often, and when they leave my house and I walk them to their car and we stand out there and we speak for 20 minutes, we are not standing there solely for the purpose of reaching a destination. We are mingling, chit-chatting, hanging around on a sidewalk in legal violation of this 25-foot buffer zone, because we are not there solely for the purpose of reaching a destination. You know, where are our privacy rights as the people who live in this neighborhood? So, let's just say, for a hypothetical, You're some random person driving down Pennacook Street, and you look over here and you see Planned Parenthood, and you see people on this side of the road, you know, along the front of the building picketing with their signs. You have a pretty good idea of what they're doing. But let's say you're driving down from this direction and you're heading here, and you look over and you see picketers standing there, and they're all holding, you know, anti-abortion signs. And you wonder, why are they standing in front of this guy's house holding signs? You're going to assume that an abortion doctor lives there. So that's what this piece of legislation, how it's going to affect these neighbors. If people are standing in front of these houses right here holding anti-abortion signs, and somebody drives by, they're going to, you know, assume that some abortion doctors live here. That's not fair for us. Another issue we heard was that there were 10 phone calls made to the police. But as you can see, there is a, where is it? A video camera right there. A video camera right there. A video camera there. And 2 more video cameras there. So with all those video cameras, if a crime was committed, it would be captured on video. And what was not mentioned by those given testimony about the 10 phone calls to the police, that there was not a single arrest. So along with that deceptive testimony that the police are called over and over, but the reality is nobody has ever been arrested here, except for the person that was across the street right here. Matter of fact, I'll show you. In this building right here, somebody held a, I think it was this building, it could have been this building. One of the people that lived there held a shotgun and pointed a shotgun directly at the protesters. That's the only person who was arrested. And I've never seen any acts of aggression by the protesters. I've lived in the house for 10 years. And the only acts of aggression that I've ever seen was towards the protesters by people who drive by and honk and scream and curse and play loud music and do whatnot. Where I've had to actually tell people if they want to come to my house to be safe, they can do so. But on the other hand, I've told them that if I ever see them trying to block somebody from going into the facility, that I will stop them from doing so. But another piece of deceptive testimony was that, oh, there's fires set on our fence, like as if somebody's trying to burn down or make a protest against Planned Parenthood by setting a fire. But let me show you this fence real quick. This is right on Rite Aid, and down in here, these bushes, these branches used to all come right down to the ground, and the homeless would hang out in here and they would do heroin. I know, because I went under the bushes, I found their blankets, I found the hypodermic needles, I talked to Rite Aid. They had all these branches cut down from like 4 feet all the way down, so the homeless couldn't hang out in here. And they still sometimes are sitting there. They panhandle for money, then they go and they hang out under there. So if there was ever any fire against this fence, and we'll go videotape the fence and look, I can almost guarantee you it was not somebody picketing against Planned Parenthood, but it was one of the homeless people that was hanging out down here trying to do whatever they were doing. Well, there's a possibility there, I suppose. There's one missing stockade. Here's something else to take into consideration on how this piece of legislation would affect Manchester. See the curb in front of Planned Parenthood? Now if you cross the street, you'll see there is no curb here. Here, well, there goes my daughter going down the sidewalk. Now imagine, 15 people picketing over here. And my daughter, where's she going to go? Out onto the street? There's no curb over here. Now this house was built in 1890, and the sidewalk, and if you took a good look at the sidewalk, I mean, this is an old school sidewalk. Over here, we have a nice curb. People are going to clearly park on the street. Picketers have plenty of room to walk back and forth, plenty of room for pedestrians to walk by. But if you go back over here and you have cars parking, well, you can see by how they've dug ruts into the grass in front of my house that they don't always park on the street. They park on the grass, on the property. As you can see, there is no front door entrance to Planned Parenthood off the street. What you have to do if you want to enter the facility is you have to drive into the driveway. Or if you're walking, you walk down and you have to walk into the driveway. And here you can see the front entrance. So the majority of the time anybody is confronted by a picketer is when they drive into this driveway. And most of the people that testified against this legislation did so on the First Amendment grounds that you shouldn't restrict people from where they stand. But you can make the argument that if you prevented people from standing in this driveway entrance, that it could be considered a safety issue. You don't want people standing on the driveway between these signs when there's cars coming in and out. And if people drive in the middle and you have to stand outside this fence, you're not going to be able to try to put a leaflet into a car window. And that would, add to the comfort level of the people that are driving in and out of Planned Parenthood. So if you were to say put a strip of paint along this driveway here, the end of the driveway here, and the end of a driveway here, and say for safety reasons, no standing or congregating in the driveway, you can put that under a safety issue and avoid the First Amendment constitutional issue. If you look at the facade of Planned Parenthood, you can, you're not going to see any big gaudy signs, that say Planned Parenthood, abortion, health, reproductive clinic. One could argue that it kind of blends in. You can see next door where this business, they kind of follow the same template here. But according to the legislation, one of the things that's legislated for them to do would be to put up a sign in front of the building that says, quote, Reproductive Health Center, Patient Safety Zone, no congregating, patrolling, picketing, or demonstrating between signs. So even those signs don't comply with the legislation, because if you don't pick it between the signs, but you pick it over here, you're basically violating the legislation. So instead of having this, kind of nonchalant, low-profile building, now we're going to be further assaulted with some gaudy signs plastered on there, telling people no standing. Here is another angle of the sidewalk on the residential side of the street. There was one more thing that happened in the committee that I thought was probably the most egregious act of deception, this ambiguity. When they mentioned Chief Mara's name over and over and over like it was gospel. Chief Mara is the chief of police in Manchester. But if you are to sponsor this piece of legislation and you call the chief and want to sit down with him for his expertise and his input as a police officer on how this would affect the police, and you bring in Planned Parenthood and NARAL or whoever, and you sit down with the chief, and the chief says, yeah, well, I mean, if it was me, I would do it like this, and yeah, sure, I mean, you know, it would help police officers if a call was to come in, rather than to sit there and play babysitter to say, look, you can't stand there. So to bring forth the chief's name over and over as if he was endorsing this piece of legislation. I didn't see the chief come down to, you know, support this piece of legislation, and neither did you. So that is another reason that if I was a committee member, I would be offended when they keep, you know, mentioning things like, oh, we don't need this zone in such a city, but we need it in Concord because we want to keep the protesters safe. Oh, Crimea River. At the very least, that's an admission that there's violence on the other side as well. So let's just do away with this whole buffer zone idea and keep things the way they are. They seem to be working fine, if you ask me. I mean, I've lived here for 10 years. I haven't seen any issues whatsoever by the protesters and picketers, acts of aggression against the people going in. And if you move them down the street, well, people who are pedestrians who want to come to Planned Parenthood still are going to get off the bus and walk down, or many of the people still park at Rite Aid because they don't want to be seen driving in and out of the facility, and they're going to have to walk out of Rite Aid right by the picketers who are going to be, if you force them to go to Rite Aid or across the street or down the corner. What's the purpose? Let's not, you know, violate all of our rights to serve, you know, this one business. So I urge you to vote against this piece of legislation, Senate Bill 319. Thanks.